On a stormy night, a widowed schoolteacher, Elena, finds a shivering toddler abandoned on her doorstep with a cryptic note. "Keep him safe. I will return for him one day." As Elena fights to protect Jamie, the child she grows to love as her own, his biological father resurfaces, claiming he's ready to take him back. But when secrets from the father's dangerous past emerge, Elena must decide. Is he truly fit to raise the son he once left behind? Will love be enough to keep Jamie safe, or will his past put everything they've built at risk? The storm battered against the old clapboard house, its weathered siding groaning under the weight of relentless rain. In the darkness of the rural street, few lights shone. Elena's home, at the edge of the neighborhood, had long been a safe haven for wayward pets, neighbors in need, and once, a lost traveler. She had built her reputation on her kindness, but tonight, the world seemed too cold, even for her. She had just settled in her chair, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, when the sound came, a frantic, desperate knocking at the door. She froze, her heart quickening. It wasn't the wind. The knocking came again, insistent and sharp, as though the visitor feared the storm might swallow them before the door opened. "Elena, breathe," she whispered to herself, clutching her robe as she rose. She peered through the lace curtain of the front door, but the rain made everything beyond it a blur. With one hand, she flicked the porch light on and unlatched the door. A toddler. His small form swayed under the weight of the wet blanket wrapped around him. He shivered violently, his tiny lips blue, his curls matted to his forehead. Elena's breath caught as she bent down, scooping him up instinctively. Her hands fumbled with the blanket, trying to cover him better, when her fingers brushed against a piece of paper pinned to it. The note, written in smudged ink, bore a single plea: "Keep him safe. I will return for him one day." Elena's voice cracked as she called into the night. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Her shout was swallowed by the storm. She strained her ears, desperate for a reply, but only the wind howled back. Hugging the child to her chest, she stepped onto the porch, the rain soaking her slippers as her eyes scanned the shadows for movement. Nothing. Inside, she placed the child on her couch, wrapping him in a warm, dry quilt. His small chest rose and fell unevenly, his breathing rasping like sandpaper. She knelt by him, brushing his cold cheek with the back of her hand. "It's okay, little one. You're safe now," she murmured. The police arrived an hour later, trudging through the drenched yard with grim expressions. Elena relayed everything: how she'd found him, the note, her search for his family in the storm. But when the officers left with no answers and promises to investigate, the boy's presence lingered like a question with no answer. Days passed, then weeks. Despite her calls to the authorities and flyers pinned to every bulletin board in town, no one came forward. The boy, whom she called Jamie after her late husband, began to heal. The pallor in his cheeks gave way to a warm glow, and his hesitant giggles filled the once silent house. But not everyone welcomed him. Whispers floated through the narrow streets of the town, a child appearing out of nowhere on a school teacher's porch. Some called it a miracle, others a scandal. Mrs. Henderson, the gossip at the corner store, was the first to mutter, "I don't buy it. She's hiding something." Soon, the murmurs turned into outright accusations. "Why is no one coming forward, Elena? Are you sure you didn't encourage this somehow?" Her neighbor, Mr. Perez, asked one morning as they stood in the checkout line. Elena clenched her jaw but said nothing. Jamie, holding her hand, squeezed it tightly, as if sensing her unease. Her resolve deepened when, one icy morning, a woman appeared at her door. The woman, her hair streaked with gray and her hands trembling, identified herself as Jamie's grandmother. "You've had your time with him," she said, her voice sharp. "I'm here to take him home." Jamie hid behind Elena, his small arms wrapping around her leg. Elena knelt to meet his gaze, her voice steady. "No one's taking you anywhere, Jamie, I promise." But promises weren't enough. Days later, the woman filed for custody, claiming Elena had no right to keep her grandson. The court date loomed, a shadow over their small home, and Elena felt the weight of the town's eyes on her. Every whispered judgment, every sideways glance, only tightened the knot in her chest. In the quiet moments after Jamie had fallen asleep, she would sit at her desk, the note in her hand. Its 5 words haunted her. "Keep him safe. I will return." "Who are you?" she whispered to the empty room. "And why did you leave him?" With the storm of court battles ahead, Elena knew one thing: she would fight. She had taken Jamie into her home out of kindness, but now she couldn't imagine a life without him. Whatever the note's author had meant by safe, Elena knew it was more than shelter. It was love, stability, and warmth. She had given him those, and she wasn't about to let them be taken away. Her determination solidified in the cold glow of her desk lamp as she scrawled her own note on the back of a legal pad. "I will not give him up. He belongs here." The wind rattled the window pane, but Elena didn't flinch. The storm wasn't outside anymore. It was in her heart. The courtroom smelled of old wood polish and faint mildew, the heavy benches arranged in neat rows. Elena sat stiffly, her hands clasped together as though in silent prayer. Across the aisle, Jamie's biological grandmother, Ruth, sat with a tight expression, her lips pressed into a thin line. The judge's gavel rapped sharply against the podium, jolting everyone into silence. "Miss Elena Rivera, you've cared for this child for 6 months, correct?" the judge asked, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "Yes, Your Honor," Elena replied, her voice steady but soft. "From the night he was left on my doorstep. And you have no knowledge of his biological parents' whereabouts or intentions?" "No, Your Honor. Just the note. It said to keep him safe." The judge leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "And yet, Ruth Santiago claims to be the child's grandmother and asserts her right to custody. Mrs. Santiago, do you have proof of your relationship to the child?" Ruth stood, her trembling hands clutching a photograph of a young man holding a newborn. The resemblance to Jamie was undeniable, his round cheeks and dark curls unmistakable. "This is my son, Aaron. He's Jamie's father. He made mistakes, but he's trying to fix them. I promised him I'd bring Jamie home." Elena felt the air leave her lungs. She glanced at Jamie sitting beside her, his wide eyes darting nervously between the adults. He clung to the stuffed bear Elena had given him on his first night there, his small knuckles white. "Mrs. Santiago," Elena said, her voice breaking slightly as she turned to face the woman. "With all due respect, Jamie doesn't know you. He's thriving here. He's happy. Uprooting him—" "I've already lost my son," Ruth snapped, her voice cracking with raw emotion. "I won't lose my grandson, too," the courtroom murmured, and the judge silenced them with a glance. "Order." Elena's heart ached. She could see the pain in Ruth's eyes, but her own love for Jamie burned like a shield. This wasn't just about the law, it was about what was best for Jamie, and in her heart, she knew that was her home. The legal proceedings dragged on for weeks. Every visit to the courthouse left Elena more drained, her resolve tested at every turn. The whispers in town grew louder. People took sides, some rallying behind Elena, others sympathizing with Ruth's plea. Jamie, shielded as much as Elena could manage, began to sense the tension. "Am I going to leave?" he asked one night, his voice barely audible over the hum of the radiator. They sat together in the small living room, the glow of the fireplace softening the shadows of the room. Elena's chest tightened. She gathered him in her arms, smoothing his curls. "No, sweetheart, I'm not going to let anyone take you away." "But why do they want me to go?" he asked, his voice quivering. "Did I do something bad?" Tears stung her eyes. "Oh, Jamie, no. You didn't do anything wrong. You're perfect, just as you are. This isn't about you. It's about grown-ups trying to figure things out. But I'll always fight for you. Always." He nodded against her shoulder, his little fingers curling into her sweater. But even as she held him, she felt the weight of the battle ahead. The next blow came in the form of a letter slipped through her mailbox. The contents chilled her to the bone. Ruth had enlisted a private investigator to track down Jamie's father, Aaron. The letter claimed Aaron was ready to return and take responsibility for his son. The court would reconvene to decide whether Aaron should regain custody. Elena sat at her kitchen table, the letter trembling in her hand. She thought of the note left with Jamie, those 5 words that had kept her awake so many nights. "Keep him safe. I will return." Was this the return it had promised? That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Memories of the stormy night Jamie arrived played on a loop in her mind. She thought of his small, fragile body in her arms, his whimpering cries, his warmth as he fell asleep against her chest. She had no biological claim to him, no shared history, but she had been there when no one else was. She had built a life for him, but what if Aaron had? Could she trust him? Could she risk Jamie's safety? The court hearing with Aaron present was even more emotionally charged than the first. Aaron was younger than Elena had imagined, his face gaunt, but his posture straight. He wore a simple suit, his hands folded in his lap as he addressed the court. "I made mistakes," he said, his voice steady but tinged with remorse. "I was in trouble, serious trouble. I couldn't keep Jamie safe, so I left him with a stranger. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I've turned my life around. I have a steady job now, a home. I'm ready to bring him back where he belongs." Elena clenched her fists. "He belongs somewhere safe," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "He belongs where he feels loved, where he knows he's wanted. You abandoned him. I was there when no one else was." Aaron's gaze met hers, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite name: regret, gratitude, pain. "I didn't have a choice." The judge called for a recess, leaving the courtroom heavy with unresolved tension. Elena stepped outside for air, her breath forming white clouds in the chilly afternoon. Aaron followed, his hesitant footsteps crunching on the gravel. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. She turned to him, startled. "For keeping him safe, for loving him." Elena swallowed the lump in her throat. "What do you want, Aaron? Really? I just want my son to know I didn't leave because I didn't love him." She stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. But love wasn't enough, not if it meant tearing Jamie's world apart again. As the court prepared to deliver its decision, Jamie's future hung in the balance. Would he stay with Elena, the only mother he'd ever known, or be taken back by the father who had left him behind? The gavel's sharp crack echoed through the courtroom, silencing the tense whispers. The judge, a woman with a grave expression, scanned the room before addressing the court. "After reviewing the evidence and testimony," she began, "it's clear that both parties deeply care for the welfare of this child. This decision has not been made lightly." Elena held her breath, her knuckles white as she gripped the edges of her chair. Jamie sat beside her, his small hand clasping hers tightly. Across the room, Aaron sat stiffly, his jaw clenched. The courtroom felt like it had been vacuum sealed, the anticipation suffocating. The court recognizes Aaron Santiago's rights as Jamie's biological father and acknowledges his efforts to establish a stable life. However, the judge paused, her gaze shifting to Elena. It also recognizes the bond that has formed between Jamie and Elena Rivera during this period of guardianship. For these reasons, the court orders a 6-month transition period during which Aaron will have supervised visitation with Jamie. A final decision regarding custody will be made at the end of this period. The words landed like a hammer on Elena's chest. A transition period. It wasn't a victory, nor was it a loss. It was a purgatory that left Jamie's future uncertain. She glanced at Jamie, his wide eyes brimming with confusion. "What does that mean?" he whispered. "Do I have to leave?" Elena knelt beside him, brushing his curls back. "Not yet, sweetheart. Not for a while." But the ache in her chest told her that the fight was far from over. The first visit took place at a neutral center in the neighboring town. Aaron arrived promptly, his face a mixture of nervousness and determination. Jamie hid behind Elena's legs, peeking out at the man who claimed to be his father. "Hey, bud," Aaron said, his voice soft. He crouched to Jamie's level, offering a small wrapped gift. "I got this for you." Jamie didn't move. His gaze flicked to Elena, seeking reassurance. She gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "It's okay," she whispered. Tentatively, Jamie stepped forward and accepted the gift, tearing the paper away to reveal a set of small, brightly colored toy cars. He smiled faintly, then retreated to Elena's side. The visits continued, each one a cautious dance between Aaron's attempts to connect and Jamie's hesitance. Aaron told stories of Jamie's mother, painting a picture of a young woman full of life and dreams who had passed away shortly after Jamie was born. The stories seemed to stir something in Jamie, a curiosity about the life he'd been separated from. But with each visit, Elena felt the distance growing. Jamie began asking questions she couldn't answer. Why did my dad leave me? Why didn't I live with my grandma? Each question chipped away at her confidence, her fear of losing him growing with every passing week. The major setback came during the 5th visit. It was a snowy afternoon, and Aaron had brought Jamie a small model airplane kit. They worked on it together under the watchful eye of the caseworker. Elena watched from a corner, her heart aching as Jamie laughed at something Aaron said. When the visit ended, Jamie turned to Elena with a question she hadn't been prepared for. "Can we go to Dad's house next time? I want to see where he lives." The words felt like a punch to her gut. "We'll see," she managed, her voice trembling. But the following week, Aaron requested a home visit as part of his transition plan. The court approved, and Elena was left grappling with the reality that Jamie was beginning to accept Aaron as a part of his life. Aaron's home was small but tidy, with a child's room freshly decorated in warm colors and shelves stocked with books and toys. Jamie explored with wide-eyed wonder, his laughter echoing in the modest space. "This could be your room," Aaron said, kneeling beside him. "Whenever you're ready." Elena stood in the doorway, her heart breaking. Jamie looked up at her, his expression conflicted. "Can I bring my bear?" he asked. "Of course," Aaron said with a smile. But his words weren't the reassurance Jamie was seeking. Elena could see it in his eyes. He wasn't ready to let go of her, even as he began to bond with Aaron. That night, back in their own home, Jamie crawled into Elena's lap, clutching his bear tightly. "If I go to Dad's, will you still be my mom?" he asked, his voice quivering. Elena held him close, her tears falling silently. "Always," she whispered, "no matter what." The turning point came when a piece of Aaron's past resurfaced, threatening to unravel everything. During an unsupervised visit, a man approached Aaron outside the visitation center, a man with a menacing presence and a voice that dripped with accusation. "You think you can run from your debts, Aaron?" the man growled. "You're lucky I'm not making you pay with your son." Aaron froze, his hand tightening protectively on Jamie's shoulder. Elena, who had arrived early to pick Jamie up, witnessed the exchange from a distance. Her blood ran cold. That night, she confronted Aaron. "What was that about?" she demanded, her voice sharp with fear. "Who was that man?" Aaron hesitated, his guilt evident. "It's nothing. Just someone from my past. Someone who threatened Jamie," she shot back. "If you're putting him in danger again—" "I'm not," he interrupted, his voice firm. "I've done everything to leave that life behind, but it's not that simple." Elena's fear turned to fury. "Then why are you here? Why did you come back into his life if you can't even guarantee his safety?" Aaron's shoulders slumped. "Because I love him, and I thought I could do better this time. But love wasn't enough, not if it meant risking Jamie's safety." As the final court date loomed, the truth of Aaron's past became a pivotal question. Could he truly provide a safe home for Jamie? And even if he could, was love enough to undo the pain of abandonment? The courtroom felt heavier than ever on the morning of the final hearing. Snow fell in soft flurries outside, blanketing the small town in white. But inside, the tension was palpable. Elena sat with her lawyer, her hand trembling as she gripped the corner of Jamie's stuffed bear, tucked discreetly in her lap. Across the aisle, Aaron sat with his attorney, his face lined with exhaustion and worry. The judge entered, and the room stilled. "This hearing will determine the permanent custody of Jamie Santiago. I have reviewed the evidence, the testimonies, and the updated reports submitted since the transition period began." Elena barely heard the words that followed. Her mind replayed the moment outside the visitation center when the man threatened Aaron. She had reported it to the caseworker, who then investigated further. The revelation that Aaron's past debts could still pose a risk to Jamie's safety had cast a shadow over his case. Still, Aaron's lawyer argued that he had taken significant steps to protect Jamie and himself. But the judge's next words snapped Elena back to the present. This court recognizes that both Mr. Aaron Santiago and Ms. Elena Rivera have demonstrated genuine care and love for Jamie. However, the safety and well-being of the child must remain our top priority. Elena's heart pounded. Jamie, seated beside her, looked up with wide, searching eyes. She squeezed his hand, her pulse racing. In light of the evidence presented, the court has decided that full custody will remain with Ms. Rivera. Mr. Santiago will retain visitation rights under conditions determined by the court. A collective exhale rippled through the room. Elena closed her eyes, tears streaming silently down her face. Jamie clung to her arm, his small body pressing against hers as though anchoring himself to the only home he had ever known. Aaron stood slowly, his shoulders hunched. When the hearing adjourned, he approached Elena hesitantly, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice raw, "for everything." Elena hesitated, then said, "Jamie deserves the best. That's all I've ever wanted, for him to feel safe, to feel loved." Aaron nodded, his gaze dropping to Jamie, who peered at him cautiously. "Can I still see you, buddy?" Jamie looked at Elena, seeking her approval. She knelt beside him, her hand resting on his back. "That's up to you, sweetheart. Do you want to?" Jamie nodded after a moment. "Okay," he said softly. "But you can't take me away." Aaron's face crumpled, and he crouched to meet Jamie's eyes. "Never," he promised, his voice breaking. "I'll never take you away from where you're happy." The weeks that followed were a period of cautious rebuilding. Aaron worked tirelessly to prove his commitment, attending every supervised visit and participating in family therapy sessions with Jamie and Elena. Slowly, Jamie began to trust him, not as the father he might have dreamed of, but as someone who could have a place in his life. On a cold afternoon in late February, Aaron invited Elena and Jamie to his home for dinner. Jamie hesitated at first, clinging to Elena's hand as they approached the small house. But when Aaron greeted him with a warm smile and a new set of paints for his art projects, he lit up. As they ate together, Aaron shared a story about Jamie's mother, a woman who, despite her struggles, had dreamed of a better life for her son. "She would have loved to see you happy," Aaron said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's all she ever wanted." Jamie looked up at Elena, his expression thoughtful. "I think I'm happy," he said quietly. Months later, on a warm spring evening, Elena and Jamie sat on the porch, watching the fireflies dance in the fading light. Jamie's artwork, bright swirling colors on thick paper, was clipped to a drying line nearby. The laughter of neighborhood children drifted on the breeze, mixing with the distant hum of crickets. "Do you think he'll come tomorrow?" Jamie asked, his voice steady but curious. Elena nodded. "He will. He's trying, Jamie. And that matters." Jamie leaned against her, his small hand resting on hers. "I think I want to show him my new drawing. I think he'd like that," Elena said, kissing the top of his head. The porch light flickered on as the evening deepened, casting a warm glow over their small haven. For the first time in months, Elena felt a deep, unshakable peace. Jamie had a family, not the traditional kind, but one built on love, trust, and resilience. As the seasons turned, the three of them forged a new rhythm, one filled with cautious optimism and moments of quiet joy. Aaron became a steady presence, visiting regularly and gradually earning Jamie's trust. And though Elena remained Jamie's primary parent, she recognized that Aaron's efforts were genuine, his love undeniable. In the end, it wasn't about who had custody or whose name was on the paperwork. It was about Jamie knowing, deep in his heart, that he was loved by both of them, and that no matter what, he had a home where the porch light would always shine for him. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to HeroKind Stories and leave a comment below. What moment resonated with you most? Let us know. We'd love to hear your thoughts.